Question I get from time to time is, Reg, how will nuclear war happen? Well, I'm going to paint you the scenario. This is just the brief of how it would most likely kick off. There's always variables that you can't account for and stuff like that, but this is kind of like the most generalized of how it works. 1159, the third stage of the war actually goes into effect. Basically, you have three stages to every war. First, you usually have currency war, then you have trade war, which we're somewhere in the middle of right now, and then you have shooting war. And these, I'm not going to get too into depth on what these are. If you follow my channel, you'll understand what they are. Now, at 11:59, diplomatic relations fail. Situation becomes insolvent. We move to DEFCON 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Airplanes are taking to the sky as we speak. Elites move to their bunkers as fast as they can. They're jumping on airplanes. The public is not warned at this time. Then what happens is once the elites are where they need to be, they have approximately 45 minutes to an hour to get to where they need to be, or that's where they're going to die. So that just so you know. Okay. Talks resume over phone to other countries, saying, okay, if you fire on us, we'll fire on you. This is where we're going to target. This is what we're going to, but we will leave our channel open. The actual safe bunkers for the politicians will not be targeted, so that there can be dialogue to call the thing off should it be called off. DEFCON 1 stays, airplanes are in the air, they're loaded with nukes, ships are ready, prepared to fire. Nothing's changed. Deadlines passed. Launch codes are given. Launch codes go to the silos first. They are given the green light. They punch in the codes. They get the monkey to hit the big red button, and the silos open, and big fiery plumes come out, and the nice big stream of contrails from multiple of about 450 missiles from the Minuteman missiles take to the air, which were on their way to several places, including Russia. Now in Russia, the Kremlin gives the order. Codes are punched in at the same time because the launches are detected on whoever launches first. The detection is there. The missiles are then launched the same way. And you need to see R-36 and SS-18 rockets pop up through the silos, and nice big fiery plume, and they are on their happy way as well. Between 15 minutes and a half an hour between each warhead strike, the Russians will have most missiles will have 10 warheads out of the 5,000 warheads or 5,000 missiles they may fire. The Americans can have up to 3 warheads on those missiles. While the birds are in the air, and almost all Air Force planes on all sides are in the air, including B-52 bombers, which will be loaded with B-61 nukes, as well as other cruise missile nukes. Tu-95 Blackjacks will also be Russian Blackjacks, and MiG-31s, as well as Su-22s, as well as Tu-95 Bears, and a multitude of other aircrafts will also fire the Kr-55 cruise missile, which will also have nuclear warheads on them. They will exchange in the air. There will be a plethora of nuclear-tipped cruise missiles hitting various targets here, there, everywhere. First targets before the mad scenario actually kicks off is basically all air bases, all nuclear silos, all basically army infrastructure will be targeted first. Civilian populations second. However, Russia only plans to attack a very limited amount of civilian populations, and Russia being the country that is being as large as it is, there's not really a lot of major cities in Russia. Therefore, most civilians will not be actually experiencing the actual direct hits. However, major cities will be hit, such as Moscow, Washington, Ottawa, London, Paris, etc., etc. So these places will be hit. They don't need to hit Timbuktu, so to speak, because or Tuktoyaktuk, because population density is very low and there's no strategic value. However, in Canada here, you can all major 13 Canadian armed forces bases will be hit. All the Navy ports will be hit. Norfolk and the States will definitely be hit. All the Nellis Air Force Base, you name them, they're all going to be hit. The airfields are top priority for nuclear targets. on top of the nuclear silos, because the nuclear silos can really only be loaded once. There will not be a second chance to reload the second nuke unless they get lucky. So pretty much all birds go up at once. Now, while the uh, air war is taking place, basically you will have fighters going throughout the skies shooting down bombers. Bombers will be firing cruise missiles, etc., etc. There'll be a big cat and mouse game there, but they will basically go after military infrastructure, communications stations, radar, etc., etc., as well as naval bases, ports, ships, anything that they can target of value, they will hit first. By this time, you're about a half an hour into the fight, and that the warships by then have probably launched most of their cruise missiles and have fired upon each other if they're within range. If not, they have fired upon the land-based targets. At that point, most strike bombers will have then attacked all major aircraft carriers on either the Russian side, which the Russians only have a few of. All 10 U.S. aircraft carriers will probably be taken out at some point, but they will definitely be top priority. Most Navy ships will be. So those will be taken out at that point. After about an hour and a half, the whole thing is pretty much all over. But at that point, that's when the nuclear submarines, the Black Sea Fleet, will probably pop up through the Arctic and start launching just kind of what you call the sweep up. And they'll basically launch at other targets. Most civilian populations probably won't be targeted just because they don't need to target them due to the fact that most people are going to die of starvation anyway, or radiation fallout, whichever. But they will hit some. Now, the mad scenario, when this kicks in, probably at the hour and a half point, when pretty much everybody's fired everything, allies will launch on allies. I know a lot of people don't understand how the mad scenario works. It's mutually assured destruction, meaning nobody gets the upper hand, including your allies. Now, there will be limited strikes between allies, but they will happen, such as France will launch on England, England will launch on France and Germany and whoever. Canada will, or not Canada, but the United States will launch on England. England will launch a strike or two on the United States. Israel will launch on its allies, including the United States and all of Europe, and all of nuclear Europe will launch back one or two strikes. Now, mind you, for Israel, one strike is pretty much takes out the country. That said, the other thing is Russia will launch on China, China will launch on Russia, North Korea and South Korea will exchange, but North Korea and Russia and China will also do limited exchange as well. India and Pakistan will definitely exchange on each other. Again, that's what mutually assured destruction is basically allies launch maybe one nuke each at each other, but their bulk force will go against their foe. So China and Russia will launch on the United States. The United States will launch on Russia and China, etc., etc. So just so people understand, a lot of people can't grasp that concept of what mutually assured destruction means. It means nobody gets the upper hand, period. So yes, there are no good guys, there are no friends. There's nobody on your side once those birds start flying. So after the hour and a half goes by, and there's pretty much all major Air Force bases and naval bases and any sort of infrastructure have been hit, other things that will be targeted will be bunkers. World elite bunkers, which world elites are kind of ramping up crazily at this current moment. They are basically getting everything as prepared as possible. The Russians have a huge 400-mile underground basically fallout shelter. It's armed with everything in there, and basically it's about 400 miles of tunnels, which will include not only for their civilian population, some, not everybody, but a few people, but they've got also fallout shelters throughout the USSR, so to speak, that are now actually being put into active, communities, as well as in Norway, they're getting bomb shelters ready as we speak. This is literal. This is not This is not something that's going to happen. It is happening as of the making of this video. Also in Switzerland, they have prepared a huge bunker there, which is full of anti-tank missiles, everything like that. The thing to keep in mind, and same in the States, they have a huge Midwest 1,400-mile underground tunnel that basically is their follow-up bunker. Cheyenne Mountain will be probably leveled to known as Cheyenne Hill after this exchange. The elites will not be going to Cheyenne Mountain because it's right on. It's one of the main places to get hit. It's going to be pummeled. Some people might go there, but again, it's the elites are probably going to go to smaller, more excluded bunkers that may lead into gigantic bunkers elsewhere. So China has a 5,000-mile underground bunker which is full of mobile nuclear missile launchers. The Topolams that the Russians have, those things will also be going into action as well at the same time as the silos. These things move about every 15 to 20 minutes, maybe even every 3 to 5 minutes, depending on what the once their status, and they can be reloaded at different strategic points for a secondary, a third round, a fourth round, a fifth round. So the Russians have planned themselves well. The United States and the UK have absolutely no mobile missile launchers at this current time. That said, as New Zealand, the world elites from Davos have basically bought up all kinds of property in New Zealand that is currently being made into nuclear bunkers as we speak. They will be heading there. So nuclear bunkers are basically on the rise right now, if you haven't figured it out, because the world elites know what's coming, and they are basically prepared to go in that. So once they're in there, and this whole half an hour and a half insane, mad, apocalyptic scenario plays out, the last stage is to wait till the dust clears. Now, once the dust clears, the ground offensive starts. In the Russian bunkers, in the Chinese bunkers, and in the United States bunkers, these bunkers are big. These are basically where they're storing aircraft, fighter planes, tanks, etc., and massive amounts of armament and troops, and of course the fuel to run them. An army marches on its stomach, so I can imagine, like in the giant Norway or Denmark, I can't remember if it's Norway or Denmark, where they have the big seed vault. Places like that probably are all over the world, but they probably do have massive underground hydroponic labs, because like in the Roman times, as of now, our army still marches on its stomach. So as this plays out, most thermonuclear weapons of today are burned much cleaner than what they used to. So what that means is, when the dust settles, yes, you will not be able to go into the area where the nuke hit for the next 10 to 25,000 years, but all the other infrastructure that is in place can be reconfiscated by invading armies. Hence why they have basically the land invasion planned after maybe 6 months, 8 months, a year, even 3 years after, who knows. But about 2 weeks after the initial strikes, any remaining bombers and fighters will probably do conventional bombing in certain areas to take out any sort of resistance or any sort of regular tanks, other fighter aircraft, etc., anything that could be used against them. And then again, after that, maybe 6-8 months later, you'll get a ground invasion, most likely coming up through South America from the Russians. Will probably come across the Gulf of Mexico with their, if they have any ships left, which I doubt they would. But if they did, they would be coming up through Mexico. Venezuela would probably be landing bases. There's all kinds of places for the Russians that are, Cuba would definitely be another stationary point for the Russians to set up base, as well as the Chinese would also be playing with the Russians. At some point, the Russians and Chinese will turn on each other, because you have to understand, between the United States, the Chinese, and the Russians, these are all three extremely predatory governments, and they all want to be in charge of the world. So that scenario is sort of playing out now. But when it goes hot, this is how it most likely will happen. Most places, a question that was asked to me recently, would they attack a place, say like Winnipeg, Manitoba? No, they probably would not. It wouldn't be worth a nuke. Not to be insulting, but again, there's no strategic value, because what they're looking at is things that can fight back. So that's the main thing. Now, as far as a limited amount of population killed off on both sides, this is already agreed by the Russians. This has been agreed to for pretty much since 1945, so to speak, and it was also agreed to with the anybody who strikes anybody is going to lose a big hit of population. So basically, cities like Los Angeles, New York, those type of places will be hit. Here in Canada, probably Vancouver, definitely Toronto, Ottawa being a capital, and of course maybe Montreal or someplace like that. Port aux Basques and Gander, Newfoundland, you're pretty much safe. Tuktoyaktuk, you're safe. Iqaluit, you're pretty much safe. Alert, you might be screwed because there's military bases there. That type of thing. Vancouver Island might get the pass, but Vancouver City's probably going to be leveled. That type of thing. Not a guarantee, but again, it all depends on the threat. Again, priority goes to the naval bases, because remember, they can take all this stuff with ground forces later on, and by that time the resistance will be basically of nil and void, because you have to understand, in 1929 and 1933, 93% of the populations, even though it was the Great Depression, were self-reliant. So meaning Farmer Jed, who someone said, oh my god, the stock market crash, you're gonna lose all the money in the bank, and he'll say, what's a bank? Yeah, you want to buy some eggs? That's pretty much what people were doing back then. It's like, okay, well, I'm already poor, so it didn't really matter. It was only the people that were in the stock market that got hurt. But today's scenario, only 5% of the population is self-reliant, meaning growing their own food, that type of thing. And even at that, it takes about 4 months to grow a crop, providing the weather doesn't do something funky and take out your crop. And that's not factoring a basically radioactive cloud that may pass through your farmland. So you have to factor that in. It doesn't mean nobody will survive, but it will be a miserable existence for the many who do. And there will be many. It's just you have to look at it kind of like uh, how's the best way to look at it? Like going back to the 1800s in about an hour and a half. And for some, it'll be just complete. They won't know what happened because it's going to happen very fast. So that's pretty much how the scenario plays out. That's pretty much, yes, details could change a little bit, but that's pretty much the meat and potatoes of how it's been discussed over the years, of how it's supposed to work, how it's going to work. That said, if one side catches the other side completely off guard, who knows what might happen then. It might be a complete one-sided fight. But with the detection systems, all that, the good news is the Russians say they won't launch first. Unfortunately, the American government is convinced to go to war with Russia. They want to go to war. Both sides of the aisle, both the anti-war left side and both the pro-war Zionist neocon side want to go to war with Russia. They're both in agreement on this. So in other words, you're going to war. So 500 people in the Congress, 300 people in Parliament here in Canada, and maybe, I don't know how many are in England, maybe about 300 or 400 people there, are going to decide when we start this war, if they decide that. Now, the thing is for Canada, we're just basically the battleground in between Russia and the United States. So we're in this no matter whether we want to be or not. England, well, your neighbor's kind of pissed off at you, just so you know. And Denmark, if they, again, they join NATO, Russia's already told them they will be nuked if they join NATO. If something goes awry, they get put on the A list, so to speak. Same with Norway. Finland's still up in the air what they're going to do, but you get the idea. Europe is pretty much right now on pretty much high alert, ready for a massive war with Russia. Air raid shelters are being, and bomb shelters are being basically readied in the Ukraine. Again, all throughout Eastern Europe, they're telling the populations, be prepared for a war with Russia. You have basically, a lot of people don't realize what these gigantic drills are going on through Eastern Europe. At the current making of this video, we had the Dragoon ride, which is basically armored U.S. military, medium armor and heavy armor tanks going, well, maybe not the heavy armor tanks, but the personnel carriers armed going through the eastern side of Europe. Basically, they're on patrol for Russians, is what they're doing. And now they have A-10s flying around, basically patrolling Eastern Europe, so you might as well say patrolling the Russian border, which, is just a hop, skip, and a jump, or a wing over this way to the left. So that's what's going on currently. Of course, we have major tank buildups in places like Norway, where tanks are going into, basically fallout bunker shelters in the mountains in Norway and places like that. You're getting basically the Operation Jade Helm right now in the States. A lot of people think it's for gun confiscation and stuff like that, but they're missing the big picture. What you need to do is grab yourself a big map and look at where all the drills are going on at this current time. Okay, and when you look at it like that, and then you look at, oh, well, pretty much Operation Jade Helm covers pretty much all of the southern side of the States, basically protecting, if there was an invasion to happen coming up from Mexico, will argumentatively say the Russians or the Chinese were to come up from Mexico at this very point, it would just happen to be U.S. Apaches in the air flying around that might just actually have live armament on it. How convenient would that be? At the same time, up north in the Arctic, Canada is now working again an extra 1,000, along with an extra 1,000 troops. We pretty much have been doing NATO drills in the Arctic for the past 6 months. We haven't stopped. In fact, since early January, it's actually increased. Canada has always done Arctic drills. That's nothing new. But to this level where we're doing them every week, that is kind of new. And at the size. So basically, we got an Eastern Patrol in Europe. We got basically military NATO military buildup there, patrolling for Russians there. I'm getting reports from people all over Europe and even northern Quebec saying, yeah, we're seeing a lot more, basically fighter aircraft activity than normal. And of course, at the same time that all these drills are going on. So what the soldiers probably don't realize, and again, they're not going to tell the soldiers, just like they're not going to tell us when the thing goes hot, because they don't want the highways clogged or whatever. Most of the world elites will be taking helicopters to their bunkers, but a lot of them may have to actually still take the limo, right? So they don't want the highways blocked when this happens, right? So they're not going to tell us. If they do, you get like about a 3-minute warning. So good luck with that. But the thing is that you have to keep in mind is that basically when you look at a map, uh, we're basically on patrol on the Russian border. The Arctic is pretty much being patrolled with these drills. The Russians are in the Arctic as we speak. And of course, a couple of weeks ago from the making of this video, we were at DEFCON 3. Now, it's a hard thing to say what actually happened. From the cockpit recordings from the RCAF pilots, my French isn't quite good enough to pick out what they said, but it sounded like they were chasing something around that, airplanes were going high, airplanes were going low, they were turning this way, they were turning that way. It did kind of sound like a dogfight. It really did. But I didn't hear anything like missiles away or anything like that, And but there are reports that up to 4 NATO airplanes were actually shot down over the Arctic by Russians. Now, something I've been referring to in my World War III updates is that, hey, watch out for Russia calling NATO's bluff. That would be definitely calling NATO's bluff. Remember, wherever Arctic drills are going on with Russia, NATO's doing an Arctic drill right across. You can't have these kind of armies that close together without a possibility of an accidental shooting. Hence, I mentioned the Kursk many times in several videos of if a scenario like that were to play like the Kursk scenario, if that were to play on the surface, we would have went to World War III. Now it's only years after when they declassify things how close we've come to World War III that you actually realize we have. Operation Able Archer is a perfect example. The Cuban Missile Crisis. Now picture right now the Cuban Missile Crisis, but in all of Eastern Europe, definitely the Ukraine, which the Russians have said they will go into a nuclear war over the Crimea in the Ukraine. That's the red line in the sand. I believe them. The other thing is that over the Arctic, yes, Canada will be shooting at the Russians over the Arctic. So will the Americans. That's a major area. The Russians have opened up old Soviet bases that were closed from the 1950s. They've opened up 18 of them in the past year, and they were closed for many decades. So you got to ask yourself, what is that? Well, what we're seeing is a military buildup and basically constant drills that are putting people on patrol without them realizing they're on patrol. 1,100-mile armored vehicle ride through Eastern Europe is on patrol, especially when the vehicles are actually armed with live ammo and with orders to be able to retaliate against anything, including protesters throwing Molotov cocktails. So when when U.S. troops have gotten the order to open fire on, through the Czech Republic, places like that, to open fire on people that are of opposition, if they feel threatened, what does that tell you? They're on patrol. Now that you have A-10s flying around, what are they on patrol for? What's an A-10's job? To take out tanks. So why are these things flying around Eastern Europe? They weren't there last year. You know what I mean? They weren't doing it. And again, you look at the in 2014, world records in military drills were broken by almost every country. Every NATO country has conducted its largest military drill. Russia conducted its largest military drills. The amount of nuclear missile tests and warhead tests from Russia, almost 1 or 2 a month. These things aren't cheap, and Russia never did that before 2010. They, would test a couple of missiles a year. That's normal. But to test one about every 3 weeks or so, that's a little bit much. They're doing it for a show of force. They're doing it for a reason. And to do this while they're doing their largest Arctic naval drill with 40,000 troops and over 60 naval aircraft and a couple hundred aircraft, aircraft and warships, you got to say, okay, well, something's going on. They're on patrol. The Russians are on patrol. They're bomber excursions and basically breaching borders and buzzing people's borders with their bombers. Again, hundreds in like less than a couple of months. NATO fighter scrambles. Again, just the daily news that comes in tells you what's happening. We're in World War III. Again, trade war, currency war, trade war, shooting war. Okay, and we're somewhere in the middle of trade war. So at that, if it does decide to go hot, you have to understand the world economies play into this. It's what it's really all about. Is at the bottom line, it's about resources and money. It's doesn't matter which paradigm you pick, the Anglo-American Empire or the Asian Pacific Empire. Right now, Russia is actually kind of protecting China because China is basically globally taking debasing the world reserve currency with their currency, and this is going to be a very unsettling thing for the United States. It's being isolated. Many European leaders have come out screaming about they don't want a war in Europe, another war in Europe. So why would they be saying this? We have world elites that are out there like Jacob Rothschild saying, look, we're pretty much identical to where we were just before the start of World War II. And if you look at it, from 1933 to 1939, 2010 to now, we're pretty much on the same path that happened to get World War II. Yes, the details are slightly different, but the recipe's the same. Right after World War I, we said, lest we forget. Right after World War II, we said, never again. But did we listen? What are we going to say after World War III? Oops, my bad. I don't know. So anyway, I guess I'm going to leave it at about that. It's just to give people an idea. Yes, there are things going on in the world. I know there's a lot of people that might be tuning into this for the first time and say, well, this is all kind of BS or whatever. They'd never do it. They'd never do it. You're not looking at it the way you should be, because you're looking at it like a rational person. To me, no, nukes shouldn't even exist on this planet. It's an insane idea. But the problem is the people in the Cold War, they were paranoid, okay? But they were sane. They didn't want to go to war. Problem now is, especially with the me generation mentality, even in the slightly older generations that are running governments everywhere, these people are the ultimate of psychopaths. They know not what they do. They're like Captain Ahab going after the great white whale. They don't care how they get that great white whale. And if a nuclear war has to happen for them to get their great white whale, so be it. They don't care about you. So yes, that's what you have to factor in. That's about the only thing you really have to count on, is that these people are psychopaths. Therefore, when all the world's elites in Davos, Switzerland, have a meeting, the main topic of the meeting was, how do we build our bomb shelters fast enough so that we can avoid the nuclear war that's heading towards us? When the world elites, the people who run the world, so to speak, start talking like that, you should listen. And for me, everything I've pretty much spoke about in this video is stuff that is currently going on. And no, this is not normal. No, it hasn't always been that way. A lot of people say, well, yeah, but now with the internet, you can find out things so much faster. Yeah, but 2007, okay, things were happening, but not like this. 2008, okay, the crash happened, but there wasn't, and there was, destabilization around the world in rioting and stuff like that. And yes, you've always had war in the Middle East. So that, which is a part of this thing too. But also at the end of it, when you look at it, it's not till 2010 when Barack Obama signed the NDRP, which most people got sidetracked by the NDAA and sections 1021 and 1022, but they didn't realize what the NDRP is, and you need to, understand. In 2010, the U.S. government, with Barack Obama's, basically his executive order, basically signed the world's biggest natural resource grab in history, okay, and the preparation for a global war. That's what it is. It's the ultimate prep, okay. And from that point on, the Russians pretty much came out saying, don't expand NATO. It could make, it could destabilize the world. And we've had the Russians say very many times since 2014 that don't push too far, we will go to nuclear war. Within the last past month, Vladimir Putin has basically threatened nuclear war about 4 times. This is not normal. This man hasn't done that before last year. In 2010, Medvedev, he said, careful, the Russian Empire is ready to defend itself against, basically foreign aggression if it comes to it. And he did, because they knew this was coming, because again, the world elites, they plan things many years ahead. And one of the things that came out of it was that the Russians know that they're being targeted. I'm not saying the Russian government is an honest thing. Yes, the Russian, Moscow and Washington are just as corrupt as Beijing. You know what I mean? These are evil empires. They have very sick agendas. And the thing is that when you look at it at the end of the day, the Russians know a war is coming for them. And they have recently announced, yes, our nuclear forces are not only ready to respond to any nuclear threat, but they're also, their military drills and are not only really big, but they also have armored vehicles now going throughout Russia, protecting, different areas. So they're ready for a war. They're basically, the Russians are on patrol, NATO is on patrol. It's just it's not official yet. But if you can look at a map, you really figure out, okay, well, the Arctic from one end to the other on both sides is either full of Russians or NATO. So now you look at the southern United States. And after Jade Helm, yes, that the drill. A lot of people think it's about gun confiscation. It's not. What it is in a lot of vets. There's a few vets out there saying that we took part in these kind of drills before. It's just it's really big, so people notice it. But what it is to train, how to use foreign fighters in other countries and stuff like that, and train up because you can't take a white guy from Omaha, send him into the middle of the Asian, like middle of the Asia and expect them not to stand out. You know what I mean? So that's what these are for. But the question is, why would they be doing this? Well, again, when you have Apache helicopters flying over Florida, you have Apache helicopters flying over Utah and Arizona, and I forget where, pretty much all the southern United States. You got to ask yourself, why are they flying around like that? Why are there helicopters all over the place? Well, these guys are basically on patrol from a southern invasion should one accidentally happen. Again, we're on the brink, but nobody's telling you. And the reason why they're not telling you is because they don't want you to freak out. Because again, most soldiers, if they knew they were actually training for World War III, some do. Some of them are a lot smarter than what you give them credit for. They know what's going on. And being professional, they don't say nothing to their families. But that's probably because they don't believe it could ever get that bad. But again, things will travel through the wire a lot faster. Even the classified stuff will travel through army ranks faster. Even privates will learn about stuff that they're not supposed to know just because they're around it. You know what I mean? So if something happened in the Arctic, if Russia is calling NATO's bluff, it could get very bloody. And after calling NATO's bluff, it's either a put up or it's a 50-50 win big, lose big kind of scenario. If the Russians waiting for the big spark that I'm waiting for is over the Crimea in the Ukraine, if they but you got to understand both sides of the aisle. The anti-war President Barack Obama is ready to pretty much arm the Ukrainian people, which they are kind of technically doing with Bradley tanks, the armored fighting vehicles. There's about 50 of them that are supposed to be going to the Ukrainian military, which if those things make a step over the line into the Crimean territory, which is considered by Russia Russian sovereign territory. It doesn't matter if you agree with them or not. They consider it Russian sovereign territory. That could put Russia into a position where it has to put up or shut up. And I don't think the Russians really bluff. I mean, they pretty much, yes, they'll lie to you government-wise. They'll lie to you like crazy. But when they tell you they're gonna hit you back, if you just look at how Russia invades countries and how they actually handle conflict, you can pretty much, when they tell you they're going to hit you back, they're not kidding. They're not kidding around. They're giving you as much warning as possible. And the Russians have said they will not be the ones to kick off a nuclear war, but they will respond to it. And that's what they've been ready for. They're just as terrified as the world elites that keep, and it's all these people that, conspiracy theorists don't hang out with. It's the people that they don't, that all the even left-wing media or the so-called non-conspiracy people. These are big players that are like Jacob Rothschild. I mean, if you understand what his role is in the world, you understand his family, the Rothschilds, pretty much own the world. So when he says, "Hey, you know what? We're on the pretty close to another outbreak of a war in Europe." I believe the guy because these are the people that plan this stuff, So he's telling you. That said, I mean, again, Angela Merkel from Germany saying, we don't really want to go head to head with Russia. You're seeing, European country after European country. Now, mind you, this could be Russia's tactic to kind of dissolve NATO, even in an unofficial capacity, just to waver people's, like Denmark, for example, saying that they might join NATO, and then Russia responds with, well, you join NATO, you're going to be on our nuclear hit list. They've done the same right now. Norway is completely terrified because one of their bases that they had to be able to protect in the Black Sea, not the Black Sea, but the Baltic Sea, guess what? They defunded it, and now they got Russian warships pretty much just cruising past Norway, very close. They're nervous. They're scared. Again, the massive buildups of military all over the place that are pretty much surrounding Russia at their borders. And again, of course, all the missile drill tests that Russia's done, all the warnings they give, and the fact that they've been warning nuclear war for the past 3 weeks pretty much on a daily basis over the Crimea because of what's going on in the Ukraine, that could spark off something big. It doesn't mean it will, it could. But the fact that the world elites are now spending more on their underground bunkers than ever before, and quickly, what does that tell you? Can you not see the writing on the wall? So it's not the fear monger, it's not to scare people, but it is to keep people in the kind of, keeping in mind that yes, we are in that recipe for massive disaster. And again, most soldiers will not be told they're on patrol. They're going to be on patrol told they're in a drill. And if you look at these drills, all these warfare drills, they're pretty much coincide. The difference between Russia and the United States is that Russia tells the people we're preparing for a war with the United States and Europe. The Russians say it's a drill, nothing to worry about, nothing to see here. So it's a different. That's why Vladimir Putin is getting not only like mass approval ratings in his country because he's challenging NATO, but it's also too he panders to the people. For example, I'm pretty sure most of the fallout shelters that they're getting ready for in Russia for the people are probably not that good anyway. Some of them are old Soviet stuff. They're probably not going to really help that much, but the illusion that he's trying to help his people is probably good enough to get people to fight for him. So that said, the morale over there might be a little bit higher than what it is here. And with that said, again, every time Russia makes a move, NATO makes a move. Every time NATO makes a move, Russia makes 10 moves. Meaning the drills are ramping up to the point that it's not really drills anymore, it's patrols. You're seeing patrols. You're seeing things on, alert. That we might not be at DEFCON 3 anymore right now, but that can change in a moment's notice. And again, ever since that little incident up in the Arctic, now there was 2 incidents that happened up in the Arctic. I have to make this. Number one, again, take this one with a grain of salt, but whether 4 NATO airplanes were actually shot down over the Arctic, over that excursion where basically transponders were turned off, they disappeared from radar from NATO airplanes, and the RCAF chatter on sounded, again, my French isn't good enough to tell exactly because these guys were speaking pretty fast, but they definitely sounded pretty excited that they were popping out numbers, so it sounded like there was something that they were chasing around that was changing different headings and going to different altitudes and stuff like that. In other words, it sounded like a dogfight. So again, didn't hear missiles away or anything like that, but nonetheless, it doesn't mean something didn't happen. Maybe they just got a little too close for comfort and chased each other around. Who knows? But maybe some airplanes did get shot down. Now you'd say, yeah, but they would tell us. No, they wouldn't. Again, the Kursk incident, they did. There's a lot of controversy on that, but it looks like it was sunk by a U.S. Mark 48 torpedo, and that didn't come out till a couple of years after. Because let things calm down. Because if it would have been warships on the surface, it would have went to a nuclear war right away. And I'll have to do a thing on the Kursk anyway as its own, because it's such a big topic there, but it just gives you the idea and the mentality of the way governments, they'll throw things under the rug before they tell the people. Again, governments don't really work for the people, they work for themselves. And if people get wind of this, that maybe the Russians actually they pushed the Russians too far and they actually responded and shot down NATO airplanes, well, they might lose favoritism because in the idea of going to war with Russia, and that could be basically a career ender for a politician, right? So they don't want that. They'd rather catch us off guard and say, oh, well, they're attacking us, we have to respond to them. That's the way they kind of work here in North America and Europe and stuff like that. Is basically they want you to not have to think about why we're going to war. They just want you to go to war, because if you thought about it, well, you'd overthrow the government before you'd let your loved ones go get blown apart, or head into the most insane scenario of a war with Russia, which is not a winnable war on either side, really. But the Russians are preparing at the time when many NATO countries are suffering from funding, so when you're looking at it like that, I mean, the Russians do invest in the military. They might not have the best stuff in the world, but they have lots of it, and they do have they have a decent military. There's no doubt about that. Are they as good as the U.S. military? Training wise, probably not quite up to the same standard, but doesn't mean they don't know what they're doing. It would be such a bloodbath on either side, and any side that think they could just, go through it. Look, World War I was supposed to last 3 weeks. 4 years later, World War II, a month max. Yeah, 5 years later. Yeah, so we don't even question World War III. And yes, it will last more than an hour and a half because the second offensive is the land invasion, and that's more like basically just a genocidal sweep up. And if the Chinese are in on that, definitely a genocidal sweep up. By that time, if there's no military left to defend, they'll just come in and just genocide everybody because they don't want the people, they want the land. And that's why Russia and China will fight each other in the end, is because they're going to fight over the land, right? So this is where the resources are. That's where, in the same way basically the Anglo-American Empire, the U.S. and Britain and all, even Canada, goes into the Middle East to kill everybody there in the name of terrorism, so we can steal their resources. I'm not saying there's no terrorists there, of course there are, but if you see it for what it is, look, the opium fields are now producing 10 times more than what they were in Afghanistan before the occupation, under but they're protected by the U.S. soldiers, that type of thing, the oil fields, etc., etc. So we go there to steal resources. So why wouldn't they do that to us? You see what I mean? There's no good guys here. So anyway, I thought this was a video that I've talked about it, but I wanted to get more in depth on it and stuff like that. Some people have asked me, Reggie, are you a doomsdayer? Absolutely not. To me, the message is much more important than the man. I'm not really one of those people who care if somebody thinks, oh well, he's lost it or whatever, or he's lying to you. I don't really lie to people. I'm not very good at it. Yeah, I joke around and stuff like that, but I don't lie. Everything I'm telling you about here, a lot of, yes, there is speculation in here for sure. No doubt, as a result of what is actually in this video that is actually currently going on. And when you really look at the map, you can really tell that armies are building up and they're on patrol. These drills are no longer drills. They're on patrol. The Russians, pretty much since 2010, Putin has come out and said, hey, look, we are going to basically keep our army on a moment's notice. There could be a surprise drill for any side, any faction in the army at any time. We're going to be on 24 hours alert all the time, and it's just drill after drill after drill. Now, anybody that's buying into the propaganda that it's the Russians that are spearheading all this, you have to understand it's not these guys are good or these guys are bad. You can't back one side or the other on this. You have to understand both sides are being, we're pawns. They're basically, it's governments that are fighting each other. If there was no Moscow, if there was no Washington, chances are nobody would know what's going on in Russia today. No one would know what's going on. The Russians wouldn't have a clue what's going on in the States. You know what I mean? It's the governments that fight. Governments send people to war. Unfortunately, there's way too many people just following orders. And that's where the real problem is the people that may or may not follow the orders. Now, if what happened on a couple of weeks ago, which, like most things, it's hard to verify everything, but it is looking more factual than not. There was a U.S. lieutenant colonel who was fired for not sending basically nuclear codes to wherever she was supposed to send them to up in the Arctic, wherever this, the up near alert, she wouldn't send them, and she got basically arrested. Now, at that same time, that's when we had this excursion of fighter aircraft that may or may not have had a dogfight up in the Arctic. Now, if that happened, there's a couple of things you have to look at. Number one, if 4 NATO airplanes got shot down and no Russian airplanes, what does that tell you about the Russians? Number one, they're ready to fight. Number two, they're calling NATO's bluff. Number three, they're not bluffing themselves. They will fight. So, and I think the Russians are paranoid now enough. I mean, it's not like history hasn't been on their side to justify paranoia. Operation Barbarossa, it was just a drill. And next thing you know, you've got Hitler's army in your country. You know what I mean? That type of thing. They know about the Maidan coup. It was a U.S.-backed coup. Let's look at that. I mean, Ukraine has a big, when it comes to Russia, the Ukraine is the red line in the sand, like I've always said, and I think I've been pretty darn accurate on some of the things I've been saying about that. When from the Maidan massacre, I said, look, you're going to see this, and this, and within 6 months, you pretty much saw everything I said was going to happen. We're pretty much at now a year or so later. Again, the red line in the sand. Why? Because if you need to understand how important the Ukraine is to Russia. Number one, Russia had control of that. Number two, Russia knew a coup was coming. They didn't know exactly when, but they were ready for it. It was a U.S. politician that was saying, yes, we're going to have a problem with the Crimea in 2013, 2014. How would he know this in advance? You know what I mean? So what happens? The coup comes. The Russians counter-coup, and that's where you get the civil conflict out. The United States, the EU, the IMF is ready to fight the Ukraine to the last Ukrainian soldier. However, are they willing to die? Is Europe willing to die for the Ukrainians? Unfortunately, either the Ukrainians get thrown under the bus or we go to war for the Ukrainians. So how important is the Ukraine to Russia? Well, just to give you an idea of how the U.S. views the Ukraine, on every Ohio-class submarine in the U.S. fleet, which is about 14 submarines, which carry about 16 or 20 missiles each, okay? Two missiles on every submarine have three programmed warheads programmed for three specific targets: Moscow, Warsaw, and Kiev. Now, I doubted that they might have kept Kiev on there, but there's a chance they probably did. But I'm pretty sure now it'll probably go Moscow, Warsaw, Crimea. Why? Because what's in the Crimea? Again, they're getting naval bases in the naval base in Crimea. They're getting the bunkers in Crimea ready. Again, they're building up for war like you wouldn't believe. Russia is not going to let the Ukraine go. They had control of it. When you follow the money, again, the same people that run the world, Committee of 300, Rothschilds, Rockefellers, all those. It sounds like conspiracy theory, but just let's see if we can connect some dots here. Hillary Clinton. What's her stake in uh, the Ukraine? Well, one of the Ukrainian oligarchs, which I can't even come close to pronouncing the guy's name, uh, basically donated a lot of money to her campaign. Okay. Oh, Goldman Sachs is in with Monsanto into the Ukraine as well, right? Okay. Well, wait a minute. Hillary Clinton's daughter, Chelsea Clinton, is married to a Goldman Sachs, like a very high up Goldman Sachs guy. Okay, coincidence, right? Well, let's talk about Monsanto. Well, isn't George Bush heavily invested in Monsanto? Hmm, that's kind of interesting, isn't that? Wait a minute, Monsanto and Goldman Sachs. And the IMF. Hey, wait a minute, aren't those basically at the very top of the chain, owned by the Rothschilds? Huh? I don't know. You tell me. Does that do you not see the plan kind of forming? Yes, it's the same people, the George Soroses, the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers. It's always the same players. And yes, if you look at who's ripping out the resources out of the Ukraine, it's pretty much the same people. And the IMF, okay, what about the IMF, the International Monetary Fund? Oh, once again, like the U.S. Federal Reserve, owned by the Rothschilds. So you can see basically, and if we know Putin, we've seen how Putin kind of snubs the Rothschilds a bit too. So you can see when Jacob Rothschild comes out and says we're pretty much brewing for World War II kind of scenario leading up to World War III. I believe the man is telling you the truth. So world elites terrified right now. That was the biggest thing at Davos. Was, again, I can't stress that enough. That's what this main past meeting at Davos was about. Was how do we get to our bunkers quick enough? What's the property like in New Zealand? Again, bunkers going up everywhere. And a guy like Joe Skousen, who builds bunkers for people, was recently on Alex Jones, and he was talking about that too. He says, I can't tell you my client's name, but he says a lot of the New World Order guys, he says they're in panic mode right now, basically trying to get their bunkers ready in time. So you have countries getting bunkers ready for civilian populations all over the place: Sweden, Switzerland, Norway, Russia. The U.S. don't care. A lot of Eastern Bloc countries. Eastern European countries, Lithuania, Romania, Czech, they're getting fallout shelters ready. What does that tell you? Well, all these big drills, basically, you might as well say is NATO on patrol. Well, you do the math. So my goal here isn't to terrify people. It is a terrifying. We're not talking about puppy dogs and bicycles, right? So it's a grown up, it's an adult conversation. But what I do tell people is don't be afraid to share videos like this because it for me, the message is much bigger than that. I don't care if people call me conspiracy theory. Unfortunately, I wish I was wrong. And if I was wrong, you have nothing to worry about. But what if I'm right? And the thing is unfortunately, most of the things other than how the scenario will play out, everything else in here is fact. Pretty much everything is to a response of a scenario that is past tense happened, meaning we're heading down that road big time. Yes, they will take it to that level. Almost, you can find this quote everywhere in history. We never thought that could happen here. This is a nice place. We never thought Hitler would get out of control. We never thought Stalin would get out of control. So what are we going to say about World War III? Oops, my bad. No, we're not learning from history. So we need to wake up. The best thing I can tell people is just put food away. That's the big thing. Rice, $7, $8 for an 18-pound bag of rice. Buy a bunch of them. Put them in jars. They'll keep for a long time. Just be prepared for anything. I'm not saying it's going to happen tomorrow, but I'm just saying be prepared. So with that said, if you like this kind of content, please consider making a donation to the channel. Thank you so much to everybody who has. It helps out a lot. Rate, subscribe, share, comment, like. Check out my WW3 Facebook page. I will be working on a Twitter page, maybe next week or something like that. Next to that, rate, subscribe, share, comment, like. Be true to yourself, be true to others. Always do the right thing. And remember, careful while you're listening to this show. You might actually learn something. Have yourselves a great day, eh? G'day, hi, and welcome. Question I get from time to time is, Reg, how will nuclear war happen? Well, I'm going to paint you the scenario. This is just the brief of how it would most likely kick off. There's always variables that you can't account for and stuff like that, but this is kind of like the most generalized of how it works. 1159. The third stage of the war actually goes into effect. Basically, you have three stages to every war. First, you usually have currency war, then you have trade war, which we're somewhere in the middle of right now, and then you have shooting war. And these are, I'm not going to get too into depth on what these are. If you follow my channel, you'll understand what they are. Now, at 11:59, diplomatic relations fail. Situation becomes insolvent. We move to DEFCON 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Airplanes are taking to the sky as we speak. Elites move to their bunkers as fast as they can. They're jumping on airplanes. The public is not warned at this time. Then what happens is once the elites are where they need to be, they have approximately 45 minutes to an hour to get to where they need to be, or that's where they're going to die. So that just so you know. Okay. Talks resume over phone to other countries, saying, okay, if you fire on us, we'll fire on you. This is where we're going to target. This is what we're going to, but we'll leave our channel open. The actual safe bunkers for the politicians will not be targeted, so that there can be dialogue to call the thing off should it be called off. DEFCON 1 stays, airplanes are in the air, they're loaded with nukes, ships are ready, prepared to fire. Nothing's changed. Deadlines passed. Launch codes are given. Launch codes go to the silos first. They are given the green light. They punch in the codes. They get the monkey to hit the big red button, and the silos open, and big fiery plumes come out, and the nice big stream of contrails from multiple of about 450 missiles from the Minuteman missiles take to the air, which were on their way to several places, including Russia. Now in Russia, the Kremlin gives the order. Codes are punched in at the same time because the launches are detected on whoever launches first. The detection is there. The missiles are then launched the same way. And you need to see R-36 and SS-18 rockets pop up through the silos, and nice big fiery plume, and they are on their happy way as well. Between 15 minutes and a half an hour between each warhead strike, the Russians will have most missiles will have 10 warheads out of the 5,000 warheads or 5,000 missiles they may fire. The Americans can have up to 3 warheads on those missiles. While the birds are in the air, and almost all Air Force planes on all sides are in the air, including B-52 bombers, which will be loaded with B-61 nukes, as well as other cruise missile nukes. Tu-95 Blackjacks will also be Russian Blackjacks, and MiG-31s, as well as Su-22s, as well as Tu-95 Bears, and a multitude of other aircrafts will also fire the Kr-55 cruise missile, which will also have nuclear warheads on them. They will exchange in the air. There will be a plethora of nuclear-tipped cruise missiles hitting various targets here, there, everywhere. First targets before the mad scenario actually kicks off is basically all air bases, all nuclear silos, all basically army infrastructure will be targeted first. Civilian populations second. However, Russia only plans to attack a very limited amount of civilian populations, and Russia being the country that it is, being as large as it is, there's not really a lot of major cities in Russia. Therefore, most civilians will not be actually experiencing the actual direct hits. However, major cities will be hit, such as Moscow, Washington, Ottawa, London, Paris, etc., etc. So these places will be hit. They don't need to hit Timbuktu, so to speak, because or Tuktoyaktuk, because population density is very low and there's no strategic value. However, in Canada here, all major 13 Canadian armed forces bases will be hit. All the Navy ports will be hit. Norfolk and the States will definitely be hit. All the Nellis Air Force Base, you name them, they're all going to be hit. The airfields are top priority for nuclear targets. on top of the nuclear silos, because the nuclear silos can really only be loaded once. There will not be a second chance to reload the second nuke unless they get lucky. So pretty much all birds go up at once. Now, while the uh, air war is taking place, basically you will have fighters going throughout the skies shooting down bombers. Bombers will be firing cruise missiles, etc., etc. It'll be a big cat and mouse game there, but they will basically go after military infrastructure, communications stations, radar, etc., etc., as well as naval bases, ports, ships, anything that they can target of value, they will hit first. By this time, you're about a half an hour into the fight, and at that the warships by then have probably launched most of their cruise missiles and have fired upon each other if they're within range. If not, they have fired upon the land-based targets. At that point, most strike bombers will have then attacked all major aircraft carriers on either the Russian side, which the Russians only have a few of. All 10 U.S. aircraft carriers will probably be taken out at some point. But they will definitely be top priority. Most Navy ships will be. So those will be taken out at that point. After about an hour and a half, the whole thing is pretty much all over. But at that point, that's when the nuclear submarines, the Black Sea Fleet, will probably pop up through the Arctic and start launching just kind of what you call the sweep up. And they'll basically launch at other targets. Most civilian populations probably won't be targeted just because they don't need to target them due to the fact that most people are going to die of starvation anyway, or radiation fallout, whichever. But they will hit some. Now, the mad scenario, when this kicks in, probably at the hour and a half point, when pretty much everybody's fired everything, allies will launch on allies. I know a lot of people don't understand how the mad scenario works. It's mutually assured destruction, meaning nobody gets the upper hand, including your allies. Now, there will be limited strikes between allies, but they will happen, such as France will launch on England, England will launch on France and Germany and whoever. Canada will, or not Canada, but the United States will launch on England. England will launch a strike or two on the United States. Israel will launch on its allies, including the United States and all of Europe and all of nuclear